Louis Bourzgui is the star of the revival of The Who's Tommy on Broadway. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Ali, I wanted to start by asking you, I feel like Tommy is a show that even if people haven't seen it, they know something about it, whether they know a song or part of the story. So what was your experience with Tommy prior to taking the role when you did the pre-Broadway run at the Goodman?
Yeah, I had heard the album, and I had a friend, Christian, in college who was sort of, I don't know, he took on the obligation of being the teacher of classic rock. He kind of loved everything from that era. He even like drove us around in an old 70s Westphalia. Uh, we would just he had a great record collection, so we listened to a bunch of different concept albums. One of them being Tommy. And I've sort of said that it stuck out to me because it was the original album is very ethereal. Like the live versions and what we're doing is very kind of raw and really in that rock vein. The original album actually kind of went into this almost sort of Brian Wilson Beach Boys kind of energy for a lot of it. And I remember thinking it was just especially for like the late 60s, the way they played with the panning of the voices was really uh, obscure, but in a really cool way. So it was just the album. I actually didn't even really know anything about the musical. I hadn't seen the movie. So all of that research was done after I got the part.
You've done so many great shows prior to Tommy, national tours of company and the band's visit, so many original plays, great musicals. Um, did any of those roles that you've done earlier in your career help you kind of find your way into Tommy, which is a totally unique kind of show and its own kind of rock opera? But what about those roles maybe helped you find your way into Tommy?
I love that question. Um, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it, but it was something that subconsciously happened. I guess if I'm being specific, like Band's Visit, which was my first professional job out of college, was so informative for me as an actor because I'd spent 4 years in college getting really, really specific about training, which is so important, and it's done everything for me and built this like foundation um, of like what it is to be an artist and like how to do everything in a trained way, which is great. But I think at a certain point, there's also after 4 years of doing it, you kind of come out a little like so trained that you're almost a little frozen solid in a way. And Band's Visit was like the perfect thing to kind of melt that. And David Cromer is just this brilliant director who is he's so talented at doing the whole less is more thing and having his actors do that. And every time I tried to do anything remotely large, it was just like let it just be, no, let it just be like live, kind of like film acting of um, working with my scene partner was very just like not much was going on and you just listened, let it affect you, and then you just spoke back, but like didn't try to focus too much on creating a reaction or like trying to like force any kind of emotion. And that was so helpful for me, and it was just like believing and trusting in the stillness of things. And Tommy is such a character that exists in stillness. um, and while I'm leading a show and sort of being the forefront of this piece that's so large and overwhelming, and I'm also kind of working hand in hand with these giant projections, you feel the need to um, kind of muscle through it, or like because I'm a narrator in the first act, um, sort of like work really hard to get the audience on your side. But I realized, um, and this is also an idea by Seth Barish, who's part of the Barrow group that I really respect. Um, Anytime you see someone on stage doing something and you want to kind of create the focus, you do the opposite. So all these crazy things are happening, and again, the way to create a presence on stage and to sort of lead the company is to actually be the still one. And so really, yeah, I think just a lot of my past roles have just informed me how to trust in being still, um, and how that's kind of a vantage point, and it's beautiful. I love how it ends up working.
Yeah, you're kind of addressing what I wanted to ask you next, which is Tommy as a character is so complex. Obviously, he's suffering from trauma from his childhood that he's exploring, into his adolescence and adulthood. What was the kind of first part of the character and the character journey that you latched onto to help you understand, what he's experiencing? Because it really is a very challenging role to inhabit and understand fully.
Yeah, it was. This is one of the hardest characters I've ever come into in that way because I don't know. Everything else I've ever done has kind of existed in a real world in a way. I guess like an actual plane that like you and I exist in, for the most part. I guess. So with Tommy, it's like a fable. Des likes to refer to it as sort of a modern day folktale. Um, there's these moments of really hyper realism that you have to lean into, but at the same time, the whole tone and existence of the piece is in like this magic realism. This like again this like folktale sort of thing where not all the rules of the world are necessarily you know real, I guess. so so coming into that was like, what? How do I make this clear? And there's three different Tommies throughout the piece. There's the first act where I'm a narrator, and there's the second act where the first half I'm in the catatonic state. I'm completely still and frozen in a state of trauma, and then I break out of that, and then there's the well, actually, I guess there's four Tommies because then there's the third act version of where I've broken out of that and I become this like guru rock star that's accepting all this excess and this greed and this gluttony, and I'm just filling myself up with it and thinking that that's love and using it, and then in the end, sort of realizing that all of that's false and that's no way to live, and shedding all of that and getting rid of the uh, messiah idea and just once again just restoring to being a human and turning back to family. So that's like four different characters in a way. So it helped me to differentiate them and separate them, and kind of figure out the different energies of that. That was one way in, and I think also just I don't know, just being specific about each of those parts. So like the first one being narrator, I I think about how it's more about the whole piece, the ensemble, like being a part of that and like figuring out how to like have the ensemble lift me up and how I can like narrate them and like focus on them and like put like literal spotlights with my eyes on different people so that you're watching them, and like guiding the audience and like bringing them in and being like, come, I got you. And I'm leading this younger version of myself. I've kind of said it's like the idea of eternalism, that all parts of you are existing at once, and we're just as humans experiencing it linearly. Um, this that narrator version of Tommy is existing at all times and like knows his whole journey. And then just when I went into the catatonic state version of it, it's like sort of trying to experience it also in this like magic version of this, like what it would mean to completely just shut out the world and go completely internal. It's funny. Des gave me this great analogy that helped me a lot. Of he's very inspired by Jordan Peele's Get Out and the idea of the like sunken place. Um, when he's down there and like he can like see everything that's happening from afar in like a little doorway that's like really far, but he's stuck in this like sunken area, and he's technically experiencing all of it, but just through like a almost like a little movie screen far away, and he has no control over his body. So it's kind of like that, and so I kind of envision that while I'm there. So then that analogy kind of helped out. Um, and then when I come out again, it's just like it's this experience of not really fully understanding the social world, having not lived it since he was 4 years old. So experiencing this sort of love and this following that just immediately comes to him from this miracle that they assume happens, and so he just accepts that as love and thinks that's good because he's never received anything like that, and so he just gets completely filled up by his followers, and kind of just rides the wave until he realizes that it in turn is dangerous and is causing more violence, which he can't condone since that's affected his entire life. Yeah, it's a lot, but I had to be that specific in order to, um, you know, just create a literal picture in this abstract world.
Yeah, no, incredible because I feel like as you're describing, there's so much complex character work that goes on in a show that at times is also just rollicking good fun. Like I want to ask you about Pinball Wizard in particular because that's a moment I feel like, especially in the first act, it closes the first act. The audience I feel is so anticipating that coming. And the show I was at, I mean, when it started, and then especially when you come out in later in the song, the house just kind of erupts, like people are dancing in their seat. It's such an electric moment. What is that like for you? Because you're playing it in that moment as you're describing. Tommy's in a kind of catatonic state in that song, but the energy in the house is so extraordinary. How does it feel for you? Like, can you feel that energy from the audience, and how does that inform, what you're doing on stage?
Yeah, you can definitely feel the energy for sure. It's one of the most exciting parts about this show. I think it's really cool that, like an opera, um, this piece just keeps moving, and it doesn't. We almost don't like, we don't invite clapping. I mean, people can clap when they want to, and it's fine, but it's just going to keep going. And to be honest, the only time we ever ask for applause is the end of Act One, like you said, or and then the end of the show. It's kind of like the story's going to unfold, and you can just sit there and ride the wave and almost lose yourself in it until you realize you're like, oh yeah, right, this is a show, I can clap. So the applause is usually pretty large at the end of the first act because most people haven't had the chance to, and so it's kind of applauding everything that's just happened. Um, but for me, yeah, it's like my first introduction into. Before that, I was a narrator, and this is like me finally entering the story in present tense. So I feel the weight of that. It's kind of like stepping into it, and you feel like, oh, this narrator the entire time is Tommy, and this is him. I don't know. It's like everything's happened. I kind of equate it to like when you're watching a movie and the opening sequence is like so incredible, and then all of a sudden 15 minutes into the movie, then the title sequence comes up. You're like, oh my god. Like you're like, oh wait, the movie's just starting. It's kind of like that of like, oh, now like there so much has happened, but like in a way the story of like this titular role is actually just starting at the end of Act One, which is not true because the kids are absolutely, like, in terms of the story, the kids are absolutely amazing, and I honestly am in awe of them, and the whole story they're telling in the first act, especially like they're being they're like 6 years old and they're geniuses and masters at their work already. I couldn't stand still at that age at all. um, but yeah, no, I just feel the weight of that moment, and as much as you focus on the acting and the story of this piece, there's also still the fact that this show feels like a rock concert. And moments like that, you're like, I'm focused on the story, but I'm also like, this is pretty cool. Like a little bit of my brain is like being used to be like, oh, this is fun. This feels like maybe like what Woodstock felt like at 4 a.m. when they came out and sang "See Me, Feel Me," and everyone. It's just a collective energy that you can feed off of, and vice versa. It's very cool.
Yeah, I want to ask you about another moment that's similar. As you're saying, the show is just such a journey and a ride that the audience doesn't often interrupt to applaud. But you get that moment at the end of the show, the reprise of "See Me, Feel Me," and listening to you. It is so powerful in its simplicity of how it's staged and just all the voices of the ensemble. How cathartic is that moment for you after going on this journey yourself, and kind of as soon as you step on that stage to the end, it's such a ride. What is that experience like for you, to kind of maybe let it all go at the end? There's that beautiful moment at the very end of the show with the three Tommies together. How does the end of that show resonate with you, and what does it feel like to kind of come to the end of that journey every performance?
I'm very grateful for how the show ends because it's a heavy piece, so to have something like that is, we also like it's partially, it's an address to the audience, and it's also a shedding of our characters and kind of just becoming like the players, or what have you. So like to be able to kind of shed the story, and I mean, not shed it, but like to just kind of revitalize your energy after kind of a heavy couple of hours, is good for the audience and for us. and it kind of helps me. It's a sense of closure, which is really nice. But also at the same time, like, at least how I think this piece exists in a ambiguous state, and people can bring whatever they want to it. For me, um, so much of the piece is like Tommy being distracting himself and being honestly like so self-involved in multiple different ways of like the first act choosing to go completely internal and like stare in the mirror is just to like distract yourself within and like completely shutting out everyone outside and shutting out the outside world. um, and then when he comes out of it, he doesn't really move on from like distracting himself, and from being internal, because then he just is using people's following to still kind of put himself up on a pedestal and sort of still exist within himself and still kind of not allow himself to like experience anything else really. And so in the end, it's a realization of like ego death, of true empathy, and um, realizing that life, like the meaning of life is to love the people around you and to kind of share in a collective human experience. So the show kind of ends pretty abruptly, but in a way, it's like carrying that message to the audience and realizing it even for ourselves, of just everyone being like, yeah, like at the end of the day, this is what matters most. Like we're singing to the audience, and the audience is standing up and singing back or like waving their hands back, and it's just this shared moment of like humanity is the most important thing at the end of the day, and understanding that we all share this thing. And there's so much division at all times, that music always seems to be one of those core things that at least that we can all agree on, and share like a personal intimacy with ourselves and each other. And yeah, it's just this beautiful moment where we're all just, it's almost like like a church kind of thing, where we're just all standing and sharing in this music, and feeling like a step up in consciousness together. It's really cool.
It is a really beautiful moment. Ali Louis Bourzgui, congratulations on the Who's Tommy. Thank you so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thank you. It was fun.